Well, here's a news flash for you.
What news?
Tell us a story.
Yes, tell us a story.
What is this? Good news, bad news?
I've got the story. I've got the story.
Gone all summer without a scrap of news.
Good news and bad news.
That's good news. If I'm gonna do this, I'll need my news team at my side.
News team, assemble!
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Movie News Network, the official podcast of MovieNewsNet.com. I'm your host, David Wall, and joining me today are a few of the other writers for the website, Alex Newman. How's it going, Alex?
Yeah, good, thank you. How are you doing?
Doing pretty good. And also, we have Darby Harn. How are you, man?
Doing good. Thanks for having me.
On today's show, we will start with a very special segment amplifying black voices in the film industry. Then, as usual, we'll be going through the biggest film news of the past couple weeks, along with our takes on each story. After that, we'll wrap up with a bit of what we've been watching, and we'll each bring up a story that we just can't stop thinking about. So, without further ado, let's get started. In recent weeks, the Black Lives Matter movement has taken the world by storm. The Movie News Net team stands with the black community, and to honor black voices and artists, we thought we would dedicate a portion of the show today to celebrate some of our favorite movies and TV shows by black filmmakers. So I'll just go first with one of my favorite movies of all time, actually, Do the Right Thing.
What I tell you about that noise? What I tell you about them pictures like a sign a petition to boycott Sal's famous pizzeria?
Hear me, what you ought to do is boycott that no-good barber that messed up your head.
And that's the double truth. Rude. Fight the power. Fight the power. Can't even hear myself think. Good people, please. If we don't stop this, and stop it now, we gonna do something we gonna regret for the rest of our lives. Doctor?
Come on, what?
Always do the right thing.
That's it?
That's it.
I got it. I'm gone.
I don't know if you guys have seen this movie.
I've seen it like 50 times.
I haven't, no. Yeah, what's it about? I honestly, I had a little look on my IMDb list, and I was really embarrassed by the lack of black filmmakers I had in my lists.
Do the Right Thing is a movie by Spike Lee and starring Spike Lee. It's one of his first movies. I think it's maybe his like second or third. And I think it came out like right around the time of Rodney King and like the LA riots in the early 90s.
This was a couple of years before Rodney King, actually.
Okay, wow. So it's actually even before its time then. So the movie is just basically about Spike Lee's character he works in a pizza shop in New York, owned by a couple of an Italian family. And it's like the hottest day of the year in New York, and tensions are just so high, and it's just one. I think it takes place just during one day, and it just kind of shows just how racial tensions are just a part of everyday life. And the events, I'm not going to spoil it because the events of the movie are so reflective of everything that's going on right now. And it's a movie too that, like, when I first saw it, I was younger, and I won't spoil it, but the ending is kind of, especially for someone like me at my age when I saw it, it was controversial to me, and I was like, I don't know how I feel about that ending. But the more I watch it, the more I feel like it is the perfect way to end the movie to relate to people right now in the Black Lives Matter movement if you try to understand the ending of the movie. So I love the movie. Not only does it say a lot about race, but it also is just absolutely gorgeous. It's a really colorful movie. It's really fun. It's like endlessly fun. The dialogue is amazing and really just fun to watch. And the cast is incredible. You have Spike Lee, John Turturro is in a big role. But you even have like Giancarlo Esposito from Breaking Bad is in it, and he plays a really awesome character. Who else? There's Sam Jackson is in it. Rosie Perez is in it and does a great job.
Danny Aiello.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I recommend it to absolutely anybody, and especially right now. It's if you want to try to understand what's going on today through a lens that you're not necessarily familiar with, I would suggest watching this movie because not only is it super entertaining, but it's also will make you think.
I agree 100%. I was also young when I saw it, and I had to write a paper about it in college, and so I ended up watching it a ton of times, and it's a movie that every time you watch it, there's something else. You find, even within the individual scenes, in particular the scene I think you're talking about at the end. So absolutely, there couldn't be a better movie right now, I think, for this moment, which is the beauty of the film, is that it's sort of timeless, unfortunately.
Right.
So, absolutely.
Yeah, sometimes you want films to age, don't you? You want films to become less and less relevant. But it's sometimes unfortunate when they stay relevant.
Absolutely. Let's go over to you, Darby, if you can talk about your first movie you have listed here.
Well, I wanted to talk in particular about, there's so many films that we all do the right thing, of course, but there's a movie in particular I think is helpful from the perspective coming from someone from my background.
There is no such thing as political murder, political bombing, or political violence. There is only criminal murder, criminal bombing, and criminal violence.
Are you all right, Bobby?
I'm grand, Ma.
Are they feeding you all right?
I'm starting a hunger strike on the 1st of March.
You're going head-to-head with a British government who are unshakable.
Putting my life on the line is not just the only thing I can do. It's the right thing.
Hunger by Steve McQueen, who is a British director of African descent, and he's also the director behind 12 Years a Slave, and a couple other fantastic movies. Widows came out a couple years ago, I think now. But Hunger in particular was an important film, which is available through the Criterion Collection. A small film about the Troubles in Northern Ireland, but in particular about Bobby Sands, who was a heroic figure among in Northern Ireland among I guess Republican, different meaning over there than it is for us. Folks who went on a hunger strike. He was imprisoned by British forces, went on a hunger strike. Short story, short version of it, and then ultimately died. But the reason the movie is so important to me is because one, just the background. My family is Irish. Irish identity is huge to us, but also the connection that I was able to make between that experience and through, not just because of Steve McQueen and his background, but something I realized when I was in Belfast, and I had the privilege of going to college there at Trinity in Dublin. And while we were in Belfast, we attended a assembly at Stormont Assembly, which was basically their parliament. It's kind of closed at the moment. It's had gone through some issues. But in the course of talking with these folks and talking about the Troubles, talking about this struggle, which we view primarily as religious here in the States, but really has to do with class and other things, I sort of came to the realization of something that James Baldwin, who is an African-American writer, who I encourage everybody to read, and who's behind some of the films that we may or may not talk about here, including If Beale Street Could Talk, that the problem for white Americans, for people of white descent in general, European descent, when it comes to the African-American problem, is something that James Baldwin articulated, which is that why is this problem necessary? Now, he put it in terms that I can't repeat, but why is it necessary for the white American to have the African American as a problem? And that's not a problem with the African American, it's a problem with the white American. And I never really was able to even come into any kind of understanding or even awareness of that until I was able to see through the other lens in Ireland in particular, and the struggle in Northern Ireland relative to Bobby Sands and relative to the Irish vis-a-vis the British, of class, of religion, wealth and even race in some ways. I mean, their poor views of within white culture when it comes to that type of thing. So for me, it was a huge awakening. The film itself, Hunger, is a great film. I could go on. I won't.
I haven't seen this movie, but I've always wanted to. I really like Steve McQueen's work. The stuff that I've seen, I saw 12 Years a Slave and I saw Widows. He seems to me to be like such an intellectual and somebody who really knows their stuff and he seems to really do his research for his movies. So I'll definitely check this one out. And especially, knowing that it has kind of like a specific meaning for you is very interesting. Coming from Ireland, my wife has family in Ireland. So yeah, I'll definitely have to check this one out.
It's a great, stark, really brutal film that features an outstanding performance from Michael Fassbender as Bobby Sands. I highly recommend it.
I think it's also interesting to highlight films by black filmmakers that aren't necessarily about black culture. That they have other voices that not just their own voice to amplify.
Yeah, I know that he also did Shame, starring Michael Fassbender, which is also kind of just like about white masculinity, and it's interesting. So I'll definitely have to do a deeper dive into Steve McQueen. Let's go to you, Alex. Why don't you talk about your first pick here?
That's like some freaky.
Hey, yo, you heard that new Paperboy mixtape?
That's my cousin.
You gonna want to get in there before he gets signed, man.
So, Zoo Tycoon.
You want in on Paperboy?
What? No?
Please, man.
So first pick on here is Atlanta, which if I have a chance to rep Donald Glover, I always will. If I have a chance to say anything good about him. But yeah, Atlanta is just one of those, it's just a perfect series. And it sort of fits into sort of some of his earlier work in terms of sort of Community and stuff like that, and even his music, in that it starts off quite a straight line premise and then sort of slowly gets more and more abstract. Starts off as a very sort of basic, his cousin is a rapper in sort of a poorer neighborhood. He becomes his manager. That's about it really, and it's just about them surviving week to week and trying to get his rap career off. But they've only done 2 seasons, but as you get further in, it becomes more of a concept show, in that they use it to sort of amplify different issues faced by people, but also faced by black people and in their lives. And there's a lot of, I think, that talk about living in a black community and the us and the them with black and white people, but also within black communities, have you made it? And if you've made it, are you now giving up everything you knew by, becoming rich and moving out of the neighborhood? But yeah, I can't recommend it highly enough, and the cast is like ridiculous because they've all gone on to do a lot of stuff since then. It's Donald Glover, Brian Tyree Henry, Lakeith Stanfield, and Zazie Beetz. So all of them have done really well since it aired, and 2 of them appeared in Joker last year. They've done 2 seasons, and I think the only reason season 3's been been approved, but I think it's just Donald Glover finding free time to get around to doing it, and I'm sure he will eventually.
I think I watched the first episode and I really liked it, but I, for some reason, did not continue. I don't know why, but I love all these actors. Just like you said, every one of them has gone on to be huge.
Yeah.
So
it's a very tight show as well. They're not hour-long episodes. They're only sort of 25-30 minutes long, so you always feel like you can sink your teeth into one, but there's none of them are filler episodes.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk about my second pick here, which is 13th.
1 out of 4 human beings with their hands on bars, shackled, in the world are locked up here in the land of the free.
The 13th Amendment to the Constitution makes it unconstitutional for someone to be held as a slave. There are exceptions, including criminals.
The loophole was immediately exploited.
What you got after that was a rapid transition to a mythology of black criminality.
Some people got the real problem.
Animals, beasts that needed to be controlled.
You better believe it.
Super predators.
Millions of dollars will be allocated for prison and jail facilities.
3 strikes and you are out.
It was an enormous burden on the black community, but it also violated a sense of core fairness.
I'm only human after all.
This is a documentary by Ava DuVernay. It was released on Netflix, and actually, we'll get into more films that are free to watch to anybody right now, but it was produced by Netflix, but it's on YouTube right now to stream for free, which is really cool. It's a documentary basically about the 13th Amendment of the United States Constitution and how language that was kind of left out of the 13th Amendment kind of led to the creation of the police force and kind of the creation of our current situation with American prisons and mass incarceration. And it's all stuff that I never knew about and that wasn't taught in my history classes as a kid, but it is all true, and it's all told by Black historians, and I had no idea about it because it's just not really taught in schools, and it's super relevant to what's going on today, and I highly recommend it. It's also very well realized. I feel like a lot of documentaries are just kind of bland in the way that they interview their subjects. They look straight into the camera as opposed to kind of looking off at an interviewer, which kind of makes you feel like more of a connection to that subject. And then also, usually in a documentary, you're just getting like a medium close-up. In this movie, you do get like extreme close-ups and then extreme wide shots of this person being interviewed, and they're like in an abandoned, beautiful church or something. It's super interesting just on a face value surface level, just the way it's presented. But then at the same time, it's super educational, very interesting, very informational about stuff that I had no idea about. I don't know. Have you guys seen this movie?
I have. Yeah. I agree with everything you're saying. Ava DuVernay is outstanding director. And just from a geek level, I cannot wait for New Gods. But just her commitment and her attention when it comes to issues like this, which are just highly personal to her, but also she makes it, you were talking about the framing of the shots where she creates this space, and she does it very intentionally. And she creates this emptiness around subjects which are largely empty to people who have no experience with this. And it's why it's so important to watch this particular film, but other films like it, just especially for folks like us who, probably don't have any experience. We may have seen things, we may have heard things, but I mean, this is obviously not our experience. So it's very important to if it's interesting to you out there listening, and it should be interesting to you, is to learn about as much about this as you can.
I'm going to have to watch it. Like, I saw the trailer. It's on Netflix, and I saw the trailer the other day and was just like, oh, this is going to be a big one. But just hearing the way you guys have talked about it and the way it's shot, like, I find with documentaries, especially ones covering sort of stuff that can be quite infuriating, I have to sort of, put myself in the right mindset and take some deep breaths, and I feel like I'm going to have to do that to watch this. But I think it's going to be, from what you said, it's going to be worth it and very informative and eye-opening.
Absolutely. Yeah. Speaking of documentaries, why don't you go ahead with your next one, Darby?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention I Am Not Your Negro, which is a documentary about James Baldwin.
If any white man in the world says, give me liberty or give me death, the entire white world applauds. When a black man says exactly the same thing, he is judged a criminal and treated like one, and everything possible is done to make an example so there won't be any more like him.
The story of the Negro in America is the story of America. It is not a pretty story.
African-American author, playwright, essayist, force of nature, who was just during the civil rights movement and after was a key figure in raising awareness Probably today most well known for his speeches and for a particularly epic encounter on the Dick Cavett show, in which he absolutely demolished someone who was trying to advance a really, really pathetic argument. But this documentary specifically is from Raoul Peck, who's a Haitian filmmaker, Haitian director, who's also the Minister of Finance there at one point. Weird trivia. But it's specifically focusing on Baldwin intended to write a book about the deaths of Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., which he never finished, but it's narrated by Samuel L. Jackson from Baldwin's letters and sort of notes about the project. And it's very intimate, it's very poetic, it's very surfacey in the sense of Baldwin because there's so much to him. But I would highly recommend it to anyone who's interested in this subject, interested in Baldwin, who is a huge mirror to anybody, white, black, whoever, when it comes to the subject of race. He was someone who made people uncomfortable on every side of the equation. And for that, his reputation is maybe not what it should be. But I really, really recommend this film.
Yeah, I actually just watched this about 2 days ago, and I couldn't agree more. It is so personal because you're just kind of reading, you're just being read his letters and his just his thoughts, his stream of consciousness. You know, not only about Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, and MLK, but also just like his experience being a black man in America. I remember one of the parts that really struck me was that he talked about how he was in a relationship with a white woman and they would have to leave the apartment separately. They would go onto the same train and sit close to each other, but not interact in public just because of the fear of repercussions from random people on the street and the looks they would get and the, potential violence that they would have to endure just to be in an interracial relationship. But, yeah, like this movie definitely blew me away. I feel like the content to me, I think was more impactful than necessarily the visuals and stuff like that. But I think that it is something that everybody should watch. Let's go over to you, Alex, with your next pick.
My next pick is probably a bit of a cop out, but I think it's worth mentioning. I just wanted to touch quickly on Get Out.
Why can't I move?
You're paralyzed. Now, sink into the floor.
Mom and Dad, this is my boyfriend.
Hungry, my man. Such a privilege to be able to experience another person's culture.
There's too many white people, I get nervous.
No.
Get out! Yo!
They treat us like family.
Jordan Peele was the first black winner for the Best Original Screenplay. So he won the Oscar for Best Original Screenplay. He was fourth overall nominated. Spike Lee is one of the four that had been nominated, but he was the first black winner for Original Screenplay. And I think even though it was a film that a lot of people saw, I think it's worth mentioning, especially for people that maybe aren't as informed or aren't ready to dive into some of the heavier stuff. I think it's a good introduction into it. Plays as a movie that's sort of a comedy, and then later on it becomes racial and you find out the ideas behind it. And I think it's got a lot of layers. Obviously, if you haven't seen it, I don't want to give too much away because there's a couple of really big surprises, big reveals in it. But it's essentially about an interracial couple of black guys dating a white woman, and they're going up to visit her parents for the first time. And it's just about the sort of weird weekend that happens the eerie weekend while he's up there. I don't want to say more than that. I assume both of you guys have seen it?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I think it was, for me, especially when I saw it a couple of years ago, it was a good introduction for me to sort of see something that again, like I said, with the documentary with 13th, you'd have to you got to take a deep breath and be prepared. With something like this, you can sort of go in quite easy and then still learn quite a bit about how black people do face certain types of discrimination, or at least how they feel about it. Like his, you see it from the protagonist's view of he's going to visit the sort of, it should be the normal trope of him visiting his girlfriend's parents, but they do talk about that extra layer of the fact that, well, yeah, but their daughter's dating a black man, like that must be somehow controversial, and they sort of delve into that. I think also there's a lot of metaphors there about appropriation, about how black people are good at a lot of things, and then white people can easily use them for that or take them for granted.
Yeah, something I love about Get Out is that it kind of puts a spotlight on the hypocrisy of like white liberalism in some ways, even as white liberals want to be allies. I feel like just the inherent bias that we have on face value, that's at least kind of in the first half, you kind of get that feeling of like, as someone who like I would consider myself an ally, but I still have biases that I need to be aware of and face every day because I grew up in America, and just having to face those and acknowledge those is something that I think that Jordan Peele wanted white audiences to take from the movie.
Yeah, you have to confront your prejudices, don't you? Like constantly, like it's an ongoing battle to consistently make sure and check yourself.
Absolutely. All right, I'll talk about my last pick. It's very much in line with Darby's pick because it's If Beale Street Could Talk.
You ready for this?
I've never been more ready for anything in my whole life. You know I love you, no matter what happens.
I'm yours in your mind, and that's it. You with me all the time.
Honey, there's something I gotta tell you.
Directed by Barry Jenkins, and it was based on a novel by James Baldwin. And it is such a beautiful, intimate story. And I recommend anybody just sit down and watch this. I think I believe it's set in like the 60s. And it's just about the first love of these two young Black Americans I think it's in New York, and just kind of navigating their relationship and meet each other's families, and just kind of the strive to be free as just a couple. It's really good. It's got a really good cast. It's super intimate, and you can just kind of put it on and just get put instantly into a mood. There's a lot of shots that I love in this movie where, like 13th, they're really beautiful profiles of people staring right into the camera with like a narration over it. And it's just kind of like a really moody, interesting film. It reminds me of something that like Paul Thomas Anderson would make, in that it's like very moody, very kind of ethereal and poetic. And I would say that from watching I Am Not Your Negro, it seems to be very much in line with James Baldwin's writing. So I'm going to have to do some reading of his stuff to confirm that. But yeah, this movie was my favorite movie of the year in 2018, and I definitely recommend anybody watch it.
The novel, if anybody's interested in reading the novel, If Beale Street Could Talk, would be a good place to start with Baldwin, his fiction. Regina King is herself coming along as a director. She's directed some TV recently, including This Is Us. And she's right now, or she was, I should say, because of the pandemic, she was directing her first feature, which is due to come out this year, well, probably next year. So yeah, and she's fantastic. She can do no wrong as an actress. The Leftovers, Watchmen.
And Darby, what was your last pick that you wanted to talk about today?
Fruitvale Station.
I'm not coming here anymore. This is my last time.
I know this is the last time for me too. I told you that. I'm trying to get back on my feet.
What are you gonna do?
Let me show you.
They'd rather see me lay in a hearse than lay in a back.
Like Do the Right Thing, a movie that's sadly relevant, will probably be relevant for a long time, which is about the murder of a young African-American man in San Francisco by a San Francisco PD police officer. That was sort of his, I believe it was his first feature. Ryan Coogler, and features outstanding performance by Michael B. Jordan.
I've never seen this movie, but I've always wanted to because, I really like Ryan Coogler's stuff so far, and Michael B. Jordan never fails to put in an awesome performance. Like specifically in Black Panther, he is, I think, the most interesting part of that movie. He's probably the best Marvel villain so far in that he is so relatable and just you completely understand where he's coming from. So yeah, I've never seen Fruitvale Station. I think it's because I put it on once and I watched the first scene and I said, I just don't know if I'm in the right headspace to watch something so hard to watch. But the
movie's just his day, isn't it? So a friend of mine told me about it, said it's amazing, but he said, you know what's going to happen because you know the story, because it's, non-fiction, and it's just about his day, and I think that would make it extremely hard to watch.
And then let's shoot it over to you, Alex. What was your last pick that you wanted to discuss?
Well, I'll jump off Fruitvale Station, actually, with Gerard McMurray was a producer on that film, and he's directed a few features himself, including one I watched recently, which was the first Purge.
Isaiah, come say bye.
Go do your thing, sis.
Always.
I'll see you tonight.
Citizens, this will be a tradition we celebrate every year. Join the first Purge.
No cops, no law.
I don't like it. I don't trust it.
Announcing the commencement of the first Purge. All emergency services will be suspended.
No one's coming to help us.
Stay strong. I'm coming.
This was the fourth movie in the sort of series, but the first one not directed by I can't remember his name. The guy that created the films did the original trilogy. This one's a prequel. And it is an interesting look because what they do is it's a prequel in that I'm sure everyone knows the premise of the Purge, that for one night in America, all crime is legal. Well, this is the prequel in which the new founding fathers of America, the new political party, decide to test the idea before implementing it nationwide on Staten Island.
Oh, God.
And they are welcome. So for one night on Staten Island, crime is completely legal, and they are welcome to leave. Anyone's welcome to go over to mainland New York and miss the night, but you're given $10,000 to stay on the island. And the way they word it is, you'll be financially compensated if you choose to actively participate in the Purge. And so it creates that massive issue of it. There are protesters, people against the party who are doing this. The experiment is what it's called. It's not known as the Purge then. And obviously, people are incentivized to stay with money, and that really only affects the poor people, which happens to be a large black community. And so not a lot of the film, but a big theme of the film is the fact that the rich are controlling the poor through this financial incentive. And so, yeah, it's a good movie, and it's got a lot of different, defines itself differently from the original Purge trilogy. But it was really good to see in a sort of horror thriller genre that sort of interspersed with talking about sort of socioeconomic issues and black issues as well.
Yeah, very cool. I only saw the first Purge, not the first Purge. I only saw the original Purge movie.
Yeah.
And I always thought that movie never really reached the full potential of the concept.
No,
and so
I think that's because the first movie is so low budget. Because the guy that directed it it's produced by Blumhouse, who do all the the sort of low budget horror movies that then make a lot of money. And what's his name? Ethan Hawke, who's in the first one, was just a friend of the director, and he only did it as a favor, and I think he only got $10,000 to do it, and then took a percentage cut. And then obviously the Purge has become bit of a cultural phenomenon, and so I think it ended up becoming Ethan Hawke's most successful movie ever because he took a percentage rather than took a actual salary.
It's insane. Yeah, so I definitely need to watch the rest of them and then also get into the first Purge because that sounds cool to be coming from a different voice.
Exactly, and they're fun. They're not highbrow. Like, don't expect, you know what I mean? Like, it's not, it's not gonna blow your mind, but they're fun thrillers and with a little bit of horror, a lot of shock value. But it's good, I think, to see black filmmakers put their spin on premises and on different genres.
Yeah, another example of that would be Ryan Coogler taking over with Creed, kind of the Rocky franchise, and putting his own spin on it.
Exactly.
So speaking of black filmmakers and black actors, I wanted to just highlight the recently, because of all the Black Lives Matter protests, we've been seeing a lot of celebrities and a lot of brands just kind of lazily putting up some sort of statement saying that they support Black Lives Matter, and then hoping that that's enough, to the bare minimum, to just kind of not lose a bunch of people in support of their brand. But we've also been getting a bunch of people going out and being part of these protests and going out on the front lines. And I just wanted to highlight people like John Boyega, Jamie Foxx, Tessa Thompson, Michael B. Jordan, Jennifer Lopez, Sophie Turner. There's a whole bunch of people, but specifically John Boyega, I thought, if you've watched the video of him giving a speech, I believe it was in London, it is very inspirational. It's very emotional. And if you're a fan of his, I definitely recommend checking out that speech and giving it a listen. He is definitely living out his character of Finn in real life here, and I am here for it because
he's living out the character arc of Finn better than Finn did in The Rise of Skywalker, really.
Yeah. Exactly. Yep. Exactly. Yeah, and then it was cool to see, Star Wars, the Instagram accounts and their Twitter accounts just kind of make a post about it, highlighting what he said. It's really cool to just see people that are kind of taking it one step further than just kind of posting about it and actually going to protest and being a part of it.
And I think it was a sort of smart, I don't think it was intentional on anyone's front, but it was a smart sort of move in that, Disney and Star Wars did we agree with Black Lives Matter, like a lot of companies did. John Boyega did his thing, and specifically in his speech said, I don't know if I'll have any more work after this. And then Star Wars and then Disney then came out and couldn't just say, we support BLM, that's fine. They have to, it's a step further for them to go, well, we specifically support this exact moment in time and this event that's happening with this person who we've employed before, which I think is way bolder of them.
Not only that, but also I saw that people were retweeting him saying, I don't know if I'll have a career after this. People like Jordan Peele was like, we got you. And Edgar Wright, I believe, also said something like that. So that was cool just to see that he is supported by people who support the movement. So
yeah. And I think it is, it's like you said, he's living out his sort of his Star Wars persona. And I think it's been interesting to see people, especially with, Star Wars posting stuff being like, oh, well, this isn't what I come to Star Wars for. It's kind of like those people that like seem to miss the point of Rage Against the Machine that were like, well, why are you getting all political?
Yeah, it's like, what machine did you think they were raging against?
Yeah, exactly. I heard there was that tweet that said like, it's apparently like all these white dudes thought that Rage Against the Machine was just being angry towards his mum.
At the risk of derailing all this, so I'll be brief. I'll just say the Boyega comments and the reaction from Star Wars Disney have been great because there has been this fault line in fandom, Star Wars fandom, Marvel fandom, for a few years in regards to diversity and things like that. And we sort of passed a Rubicon here with this. And I think those folks who have a problem with diversity in general, and John Boyega in particular, if they're not happy, that's fine. They can go somewhere else. So
exactly. I feel like these people are, like you said, Alex, they're the people that don't even realize that the original Star Wars was specifically a commentary on the state of America at the time and the Vietnam War and that kind of thing. And so get my politics out of Star Wars. It's like, well, it was always political. I don't know if you knew this.
Yeah, I don't know what you think there. I actually did think this was somewhat sort of ironic, I suppose, is that I was at one of the protests here in London, and there was a guy who was on our side, like, you know, he had a sign and was protesting as well, but he was wearing a First Order hoodie, and I was like, you're wearing a fascist regime's hoodie at this protest against the system.
That's hilarious. I'm sure he meant it in. Wasn't
I
just
think
threw on a hoodie.
I don't think there was any malice towards it. I just took a sneaky peek because I thought it was a little bit ironic.
Okay, so let's keep going. Just to wrap up this section about Black Lives Matter, I did want to highlight, we have an article on our site about this, but I also just wanted to throw it out there now. Distributors across the U.S. are making some of their films featuring Black voices available for free right now. We've already mentioned some of these movies, but here are the most notable offers right now. So Ava DuVernay's documentary 13th is streaming for free on YouTube right now, like I mentioned. Paramount has also made DuVernay's movie Selma about Martin Luther King available on rental platforms for no charge. I haven't seen that one, but definitely need to check that out. PBS has put up I Am Not Your Negro for free, as well as a documentary called The Black Panthers, Vanguard of the Revolution on their website for free right now. So if you want some more educational materials, you can check those out. And then also Just Mercy, the last year's movie starring Michael B. Jordan and Jamie Foxx, is available to rent for free on most digital platforms right now. Neon, which is a studio here in the U.S., they have a film called Monsters and Men from 2018 available to stream for free on their website. The Criterion Channel has a collection of 28 films by Black filmmakers available to stream for free on their website right now, which is really cool. Other movies you can watch for free right now, if you just Google it, Ali, the Muhammad Ali biopic, is available to watch for free. Antoine Fisher, The Hate You Give, Secret Lives of Bees, and Strong Island are all available to watch for free. And there's even more. And in addition to this, most paid streaming platforms like Netflix, HBO Max, and Amazon Prime have their own news sections on their apps that are dedicated to amplifying Black voices. So, there's everywhere you look, there's some really great films to watch, and I suggest diving in because there's a lot out there. And so we're going to move on to the next stories, but I don't want people to think that we're done talking about Black Lives Matter. So when we get to what we've been watching a little bit later, I'll be discussing the stuff I've been checking out lately to educate myself and support Black artists. And then in the coming weeks, I'm sure, we'll probably all be watching some more of this kind of stuff. And then in the show notes, I'll also be posting some helpful links and places to donate, petitions to sign, and other educational materials. So moving on, let's get into the news. Our story we want to talk about today is about Warner Brothers responding to J.K. Rowling. So the Harry Potter author made several controversial statements regarding trans people. And Warner Brothers, which is the studio behind the Harry Potter movies, released a public statement to Variety in which they reaffirmed their commitment to inclusiveness. They said, "The events in the last several weeks have affirmed our resolve as a company to confront difficult societal issues. Warner Brothers' position on inclusiveness is well established, and fostering a diverse and inclusive culture has never been more important to our company and to our audiences around the world." This statement came after several names associated to the Harry Potter franchise made public statements regarding the matter, including Eddie Redmayne, Emma Watson, Rupert Grint, and Daniel Radcliffe. So let's go over to you, Darby. I think you wrote this story for the site. What do you think of their response?
So this is a complicated issue, and there's sort of two major things with the response itself. Is one, it was absolutely necessary given the magnitude and the content of her comments. But it was also really thin because it actually doesn't name her in the actual statements. It doesn't refer to the comments themselves, and it's basically a bland, generic sort of band-aid on a very huge problem. And it is a problem for Warner Brothers because they are staked massively in J.K. Rowling in every sector of their business, from the films to the theme parks and the merchandise, etc. And it's a huge problem because they're a huge studio in a time where having huge IP, huge tentpole franchises is absolutely necessary. I don't think that she's damaged the Harry Potter brand in any significant way, but she's injured herself, and that has made her potentially toxic to Warner Brothers, especially given the fact that she is the screenwriter and executive producer on Fantastic Beasts, which has taken on water anyway, just because it hasn't done very well, or at least it hasn't done what they hoped it would so far. So that to me is interesting. We'll see if it continues. We'll see if she continues to double down, triple down on these comments. I think if she were to do that, that would make Warner Brothers even more nervous. I'm not sure what the right word would be, but it'd be problematic for sure.
Yeah, I feel like she, like you said, she's injured herself mostly. And I wish that she would just take the L here and take a minute to shut up and listen, at the very least. But for Warner Brothers, I agree. I feel like, I don't know. I feel like they're probably in discussions with her right now about what they want to do going forward, because this is a big deal, obviously, to a lot of the fans of the franchise, which is interesting because the franchise is very inclusive. Mm-hmm. It's all about how you can come from anywhere, and how the villain of the Harry Potter franchise is all about blood purity, and the author is just kind of making statements that seem to be almost more in line with that. I wish that she would just stop and listen for a while and stop writing more and more and more.
She really doubled down on it, didn't she? Which was, I think, the big mistake. We don't want to get obviously too bogged down into the issue, but I think her issue isn't necessarily. You said it was, she needs to listen and be educated sort of about trans rights and from trans people. But I think her issue necessarily isn't that. I think it's more that because I think the word they use as a sort of slur towards her is a TERF. So like a trans exclusionary radical feminist, which is I think a sort of type of feminism that is particularly prevalent in middle-aged UK women. And I think it's that it's not that she doesn't understand or respect trans people. It's more that she doesn't like it interfering with what she believes is women's rights.
Right.
So I think she's very guarding of women. I don't think she's justified. I think she should have said that one thing, and then people should have told her she was wrong, and she should have said, yeah, you're right, I need to learn more. But she hasn't. She's gone, oh, no, I'm going to double down and say what I believe and defend what she believes she's been fighting for her whole life.
Right.
But by doing that, by defending that sort of feminist circle, she's then excluding all these women by saying they're not women.
In the first place, I don't know if anybody really cares about these Fantastic Beasts movies that much. They're
a whole other conversation in themselves.
Yeah. Like and I'm a huge Harry Potter fan, so I grew up with these books and the movies, and so the Fantastic Beasts movies on their own were kind of a disappointment to me. So I don't know if in what they did with those movies is they announced 5 before the first movie even came out. And so, I feel like going forward, they need to just kind of reanalyze their relationship with J.K. Rowling, and then also reanalyze that franchise in general, because I'm not sure even if it's going the way they planned.
Such an odd franchise in terms of, for me, it was, I do like both of them. They're fine. But I find them so problematic in that you've announced 5. You announced 5 before or just as the first one came out. That should mean you have so much pressures off. It should mean that you should be able to enjoy. The first one should have been Fantastic Beasts, and where do you find them? But it wasn't. It tried to be half that and half, let's set up Wizard Hitler.
Yeah.
Which is fine, because I find that concept very interesting. I do. I love that idea of, like, what were the wizards doing in World War II, and, like, they have their own fascism, and the idea of where, like, some of these, you know, ideas you see in Harry Potter in the 90s of, you know, like you said, the blood purity come in. It's so fascinating, but because the pressure of having, you know, the pressure's off, because you don't have to justify a sequel because you're already getting 5.
Right.
So you can easily have just had the first one be a character introduction and be quite fun, and just explore the magic of America rather than the magic of the UK.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems
and
to
the
have missed that
magical
point.
beasts.
And the magical beasts.
And that was hardly a thing. And so then the second one even doubled down on that, which it was like, sequels. Dumbledore's here. Like, it's just...
It's like, and Dumbledore's here, and it's this guy's back, you know. And it did that weird thing that I don't like when sequels do, where they revert characters back to their original, like, plot points. So, like, the second one, the guy who had his mind wiped, his mind comes back so that he can team up with Eddie Redmayne again. And there's a weird sitcom level misunderstanding between him and his love interest from the first one, so that they can be separate and have this like I guess, like, I don't know what the right word, like adversarial kind of like standoff for most of the movie, like they did in the first one, so they could do it again. It's just like, it just had these weird rehashes. I don't know.
I don't know if she's a screenwriter.
No, I don't think she's a...
No.
Yeah.
No, she is not. Yeah. She needs, this would be a great opportunity for Warner Brothers and her just to, like, say, let's hire somebody else for Fantastic Beasts. So she'd be story by executive producer. It's her franchise. It's her tremendous imagination. She has a tremendous imagination. She's given this huge universe to kids, to young adults. She can maybe take a movie off. She probably needs to.
I agree.
I'd be very interested to see all the clauses in the contracts. Obviously, obviously, like, if they suddenly, like, split with her, there's no way they suddenly shut down the Harry Potter land at Universal. Like, that's not happening anytime soon. Hell, Universal can still use Marvel stuff, and they haven't had the contract for God knows how long. You know, because there's always rumors around, but I hear with Universal having Marvel stuff, they can now do it. They can't make new Marvel stuff, but as long as they keep the rides they've got maintained and ongoing, they can keep them in perpetuity. So I imagine that a split with her, while it might not be instantly detrimental, it's something that'll affect them in 10 years' time, when they suddenly are like, they hit the end of the contract and they can't make any more films, and they can't do this and they can't do that.
Interesting. We'll have to see what happens with that. All right. So we are going to move forward into our next little sub-segment, talking about all of the films that are being pushed during the pandemic. And that sub-segment is called The Delay After Tomorrow. So Warner Brothers announced on Friday that Christopher Nolan's Tenet will now be released on July 31st, 2020, after 1 week after Disney's Mulan instead of a week before. Also, Patty Jenkins' Wonder Woman 1984 has been delayed from August 14th, 2020 to October 2nd, 2020. The other significant movies that have been pushed include Matrix 4 being delayed almost 11 months back to April 1st, 2022. And Godzilla vs. Kong from November 20th, 2020 to May 21st, 2021, right around the time in which Godzilla King of the Monsters was released a few years ago. So let's go to you, Darby. What do you think about Tenet being delayed 2 weeks? Do you think that that's going to save the movie in some way?
Well, I'll say I hope so, because I'm a huge Christopher Nolan fan, and I'm a huge fan of movies, and I would love to go see one in the theater, but I'm really pessimistic right now about these release dates and really the whole state of affairs with theaters, just given the situation here in the States, at least, with as we reopen, we're largely reopen, outside the major cities. New York is sort of gradually doing it. But the cases with coronavirus seem to be spiking in places that have reopened. That doesn't bode well. I think, I could be wrong, I often am, about long-term health for things like the movie theaters. in terms of at least going back to normal in the near future. So Tenet going back 2 weeks, that seems to be trying to catch the wave of the fact that New York anticipates opening the theaters at that point, which is absolutely essential to any movie that's going to open here. Wonder Woman, if we get into late summer, early fall, and the theaters still have not largely opened, I think this year is probably a write-off when it comes to theatrical distribution, which that the ramifications of that are huge, and we could talk for an hour about itself, but suffice to say, I think that probably changes the math for the studios and the theaters.
What do you think, Alex? Do you think that, I mean, is this a reaction in terms of Tenet? Do you think that's a reactionary thing because they heard that movie theaters are probably going to be opening by then?
I think so. I think we said, I think a couple of weeks ago, we mentioned that we were not optimistic about that date of mid-July, and we said maybe late July, and essentially that's what they've done. They've jumped over Mulan for obvious reasons, but I think they're probably thinking that Mulan will get moved, and then they can be the first film.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, they're all these dates mean for this year is we will open as soon as theaters are open. They're really just trying to hold out. But they also know, even if the states decide to go, oh, well, we'll get some social distancing theaters open and it'll be fine. If the rest of the world isn't playing ball like that, they're going to lose a lot of money the second that hits, online streaming illegally. They're going to lose a lot of money to torrents and leaks and people writing reviews and the plots and all that online. And so I think they want to have as big a worldwide release as possible, and that's harder and harder to do.
In terms of, I agree with what you guys have said. I think in terms of The Matrix being moved, I think that's just because they haven't been able to shoot. And the same thing with Godzilla versus Kong. They just need more time to shoot it and then give them more time for post. And then with all of these movies this year, it's really a shame that we can't go see these in theaters. And hopefully that will happen with Tenet, but at the same time, I'm like, I don't know if I want to sit in a theater right now with a face mask on. It would be great if there was some kind of push, like I pushed for, that the drive-ins would open all over the country and kind of get that going. I think that would be cool, but it seems like that is kind of a thing, but not on a huge scale that would need that, like a movie like Tenet would need to be successful.
I think Wonder Woman is the litmus test. I think if they have to push that into next year, Warner's will probably look really hard at streaming, which they've already kind of floated the idea that they might. The pushing that, at that point, Wonder Woman will have been delayed from its original release something like a year. I think it was originally meant to come out in October, November of last year. They pushed it to avoid conflict with Joker. And then just the uncertainty over theaters, over Corona, over everything. And at some point, the studios have to look at their bottom line, they're not healthy right now. So I think Wonder Woman is probably the big test. Tenet, I don't know enough about the budget, things like that. But a big movie like Wonder Woman or Black Widow, which is, I think, November now, if they can't come out in the theater this year, I think the streaming option becomes more and more pressing. And just because people will probably at that point be going stir crazy, like, we want to watch something, we need to watch something. So
yeah, they probably do hit a point where, like you said, it's that test for if these two big movies, if Black Widow and Wonder Woman get pushed to next year, that's the point where they go, well, if you released Black Widow on Disney Plus, you'd probably get the most streaming numbers that either any film or at least any film on Disney Plus has ever gotten in the shortest amount of time. You could, you could break all the records and get a bunch of new subscribers within days, and they might think, let's cut our losses and make a little bit of money now rather than waiting what could be another 8 months.
And I think people would probably pay like a pay-per-view, to watch the film as opposed to just being a subscriber. I think they've done studies. I want to say we quoted some studies in one or two of the articles we've written about this, where people will pay, $20, something like that, to watch one of these at home. And if that's the case, the incentive for the studios to do it becomes all the more pressing the longer this goes on.
What's funny about this story is that at the same time as some movies are being pushed, the world is also starting to reopen, and governments all over the globe are starting to allow film production to resume filming over the following weeks and months. So we will be discussing all of that news in our brand new sub-segment, Back to the Feature.
All right, here we go. Roll except what?
First off, Spider-Verse 2 has started production, and this actually is kind of interesting because they're able to do it remotely, and they can have artists all over the globe kind of working on this. So Nick Kondo, which is one of the key figures behind Into the Spider-Verse, recently announced that on Twitter that the animated Spider-Man sequel is actively moving forward as he's back on the job. So they've started production. Mission Impossible 7 is going to resume shooting. A couple of weeks ago, Tommy Gromley, who's the first assistant director on the film, told BBC Radio 4 their morning show that they were getting ready to restart shooting in September and that they would extend to April or May. And then Simon Pegg later told Variety that production would begin with outdoor scenes, which is safer. And the initial plan was to produce Mission Impossible 7 and 8 back-to-back. It's still unclear whether that is still happening. And then also I want to mention that the UK government has laid out a plan to restart film productions. The Guardian reported late last month that the British Film Commission and the British Film Institute had published a guideline signed off by the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, which allowed film production to start early July in the UK as long as several rules are followed regarding physical distancing, safety and training, temperature tests, among other things. This kind of directly affects Matt Reeves' The Batman, Fantastic Beasts 3, and Disney's Little Mermaid and The Witcher were also warming up to shoot in the UK before coronavirus hit. So let's go to you, Alex. What do you think about all of these new productions getting going again now that the world is kind of reopening in some ways?
It's good to see it happening, of course. Obviously, it's nice to have some news again of stuff starting up, but, it could be, again, one of those cases where they start them up and then these production companies have got another film that they've then got to schedule and they can't because they've got, a backlog of 5 other films that still haven't been released. But saying that, it's good news. The UK, we've got our retail shops open tomorrow. So this will be the first time that non-essential shops have been open since March. So yeah, that's exciting. And so I think studios, like the announcement said, are coming, within the next few weeks. Obviously, any crew coming over from America are going to have to quarantine for 2 weeks. But other than that, I think it's all good news. And I think it really just depends on how much this social distance stuff is enforced. Is it a case of, oh yeah, we're social distancing, but then everyone on set knows that no one's social distancing? But I think it's a case of I think the government wants to do it because the economy's hit that level where it just needs to happen now.
I find the animation angle kind of interesting with Spider-Verse. I think it's cool that we might be inadvertently just getting a lot more animated content because they can just kind of continue full-scale production remotely, which is really cool. I love animation, so I'm excited for not only Spider-Verse, but any animated projects that we will get because live action has kind of been stalled. So that's kind of cool. But with Mission Impossible 7, I really like the Mission Impossible movies, especially, the more recent ones. And, I'm excited that we'll get that kind of stuff. But like you said, it just depends on if these productions enforce their social distancing. So what do you think, Darby, about all this stuff?
I'm kind of pessimistic the way I am about just the theaters because just given the situation, but I'm hopeful that it goes off without a hitch. I'm a huge Mission Impossible fan too. I was really looking forward to these. I think the likelihood of the back-to-back shooting is probably less now, but just because they'll probably want to get something out as quickly as they can. So maybe waiting to film another movie, filming them both together is going to delay the post, or maybe not. on one, but I have a hard time seeing it if and it's a big if we're encountering problems in other situations with the virus in certain areas or just in large, you know, a big film crew, especially for something for like Mission Impossible where there's 500 to 1,000 people potentially working on this crew. I mean, is that realistic? At the same time, I agree with you 1,000% on the animation. I think we're going to see a lot of this because that's one thing that is not going to be interrupted. I also think, real quick, this volume technology that The Mandalorian has pioneered is going to change the way that they're making a lot of live action stuff, because it sort of negates having to go to locations. It negates a lot of that type of thing. And in this environment, people are going to start leaning on that, I think. So we'll see.
I didn't think about that, but that's very true.
Yeah.
It's such a cool technology, and it allows them to do stuff in camera that looks just like being on location, which is incredible.
Yeah, I think for something like Mission Impossible, I think volume would be potentially something that would be fantastic, unless Tom Cruise really just wants to jump off the side of something real, which probably he does. So we'll see. But yeah, I think the future is going to be very different, I think, for films and TV.
Yeah, we're looking at a whole new landscape, aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
I was excited for Mission Impossible 7 and 8 as well, because, you know, when they film stuff back to back, you know that they've then got what would hopefully be like a 2-part story, which just means they've got more to play with, and the Mission Impossibles have just been going up and up, haven't they?
Yeah.
Definitely. So we'll have to see what happens and if these productions stay on track as we go forward. So we have just a couple more bits of film news, and we are going to go through them quickfire style in our next segment, which is Quickfire News.
First up, the Bill and Ted trailer. The time-traveling and rock and roll duo are back after 29 years, with a first look at their brand new adventure and a righteous poster. This time around, we learn that Bill and Ted have been on their way to fulfilling their destiny, set in Bill and Ted's excellent adventure, by uniting the universe in harmony with their music. But they're not quite there yet. The movie is currently scheduled to come out August 21st, although I think from what we've been hearing, what we discussed before, that's quite optimistic, but we'll have to see. I haven't actually seen Bill and Ted, but I know that it's a classic, and I think this trailer coming out makes me want to go back and watch the originals. So I think that's coming up on my list for this week.
The director of Chernobyl, Johan Rink, is teaming up with Greg Mazin. He's the writer for Chernobyl as well. They're teaming up for the adaptation of The Last of Us video game for HBO. I have not played The Last of Us, so I'm a little bit ignorant on this front, but I am a huge fan of Chernobyl. It's outstanding. These guys are fantastic. It's similarly apocalyptic, maybe, I guess, so it makes sense from that front. If I could speculate irresponsibly for a second, as far as casting, the Irish actress Jessie Buckley from Chernobyl would make a lot of sense in The Last of Us, so I might look out for her.
Junkie XL, who composed the music for Mad Max Fury Road, he's been brought on to score the crossover film Godzilla vs. Kong. In regards to the rating, Adam Wingard recently confirmed on his Instagram account that the movie will be PG-13 for intense sequences of creature violence / destruction and brief language. He added, "That's an understatement." Yeah, I mean, I'm excited for this. It's kind of interesting to think about we're getting another Godzilla versus King Kong after, you know, I don't know, 50 years since the last one or whatever. And Junkie XL, you know, did a great job on Mad Max Fury Road, so I'm excited to see what he brings to a monster film. You know, I think we all assumed it would be PG-13. That's no big surprise to me.
David Fincher's new film Mank might be getting an October release. Eric Roth mentioned on the Pardon My Take podcast that David Fincher shot Mank like a 1930s movie in black and white, and that Netflix is planning to release the feature film in October, but they'll be not be running the festival circuit this year. So again, hoping for an October release, and since it's on Netflix, that really should happen now that they're already in post-production. It's been filmed. Eric Roth is an amazing screenwriter, so I'm very excited for the story. He wrote Benjamin Button and Forrest Gump, two amazing films, plus a bunch of other stuff that you've definitely heard of, so I'm really excited.
J.K. Simmons has signed a multi-film deal for the Marvel Studios MCU Spider-Man film, so he played J. Jonah Jameson in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films and reprised the role kind of in Spider-Man Far From Home. And so this is standard operating procedure for Marvel. They tend to sign people to multi-film deals even if they don't use them. So it's not guaranteed, but it opens the door to him coming back, which would be really cool because that was one of the great moments of that film. And it seems in line with some this multiverse thing that they're going for. They seem to be going for in the MCU in this next phase. They seem to be playing around with some interesting stuff. So maybe there's more of that.
All right, so that wraps up all of the news this week. Let's get into a little bit of what we've been watching. Let's go over to you, Alex. Why don't you go first?
I've been watching a few sort of different things. Sort of in the last couple of weeks, I think I've just been watching a lot of comfort films. Watched the Hangover trilogy, which was a lot of fun. And nothing too serious there. It was good to sort of rewatch them. I think I think the first one's about 10 years old now, so they're sort of like it's in time's sort of blown past. First one's still funny. Second one's a copy of the first one, and the third one's okay. You know what I mean? They are what they are, but it's really interesting to watch, knowing that Todd Phillips goes on to direct Joker, and sort of seeing it's just weird watching those films, being like, oh, this guy's gonna direct one of the the highest grossing R-rated film of all time. Interesting. But it's still but they still hold up. They have the humor's stupid, but it hasn't aged badly or anything. I watched The Mummy. I'd only ever seen the ending, so I'd never seen the full movie, and again, I miss Brendan Fraser and he should be in more.
There you go.
Yeah. I'm doing Marvel Mondays. So I'm up to Iron Man 3 now, which I will die defending that movie from everyone. It is debatably, and one of the most controversial opinions I have, debatably better than Iron Man 1, definitely better than Iron Man 2. I do love Jon Favreau, but I think Shane Black is amazing. And people always say, when you say that, they say, well, it's a great Shane Black film, but not a great Iron Man film. And I respond with, what does that even mean?
That's what they say about
Iron Man.
That's what they say about Last Jedi as well.
Yeah. I'm like, what? Yeah. No, it's the characters and they do things. Like, shut up. No, it's probably a good defense. But anyway, I love Iron Man 3. I think it was it got rid of the metal on metal attack. The second one had a lot of robots versus robots. Or people in robot suits. And I think the third one moved away from that. It was great in a post-Avengers world. It dealt with Tony's PTSD, which then goes on to inspire him in Age of Ultron and essentially inspires his character all the way up through to Endgame. And that's the beginning of it. So it's way more important than give it credit for. And the big twist at the end, I think, just got a bunch of people that were very faithful to the comic books very worked up. But to be honest, that was the beauty of the MCU to me, or is the beauty, is that it can deviate as much as it wants from the comics, and it used that against its audience to have a twist. And even then, I always love it when films mess with the marketing, and all the marketing said, look, the Mandarin, look at the Mandarin, look at the Mandarin. Oh, yeah. Also, Guy Pearce is in this movie, but don't worry about that. And I think that was a really clever bit of marketing, and I always like it when marketing and the film see eye to eye. In terms of TV, I've been watching, doing my Community rewatch, which I will talk about a little bit in our next segment, but I've been loving it. I would recommend it to anyone, and I talked about it last time, so I won't go into it again. I watched Space Force, which was good. I know it's getting pretty terrible reviews, but I think it's fine. I'm not like a diehard Office fan, and I know it's Greg Daniels did this as well, but I think it's Steve Carell. It's funny enough. John Malkovich is good in it. It's not hilarious. I think it's just somewhat interesting, and it's a cool concept. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is back, so if you're watching that, you know how good it is. I'm definitely writing an article once it finishes, because we're in the final season. It is the surprise to everyone that it has lasted this long. No one would have guessed in season 1 that it would outlast Daredevil and the Netflix Marvel stuff. And it's just kept on going. but I won't dwell on it. Just if you only saw season 1, definitely keep going and jump back into it. And then I just wanted to make a couple of last points because I know we were going to circle back to Black Lives Matter. And I thought I'd sort of mention some of the other sort of things I've been watching recently. I sort of went through all my lists and sort of was like, oh, who have I got that's sort of behind the scenes that's a sort of a black filmmaker? And one of them is Ubah Mohamed. She's a writer and the head story editor for Legends of Tomorrow, which is a Arrowverse series and probably the best of the Arrowverse series is. Whereas I do love Flash and Arrow, they sort of tend to drag on. Legends of Tomorrow has had shorter seasons, kept it really tight, and has way more fun than the other ones. And the fact that she's written a lot of the episodes and is the story editor speaks a lot to her talent. I did a sort of rewatch of the Star Wars movies a few weeks ago, and Victoria Mahoney was the second unit director for The Rise of Skywalker. So she shot a lot of the sort of extra footage for it. So I think that's also worth mentioning.
I saw her in the behind the scenes doc and just like kind of directing the puppets and stuff and just like miniature sets and stuff. And she seems to have a really good eye. And I'm excited to see where her career goes.
Yeah. And so, I just thought it was worth mentioning those two people that are black filmmakers that have been in stuff, but I didn't know that until I started doing my research.
Very cool. I'll go ahead and say I have been, as I mentioned before on previous episodes, I've been watching Adventure Time and The Good Place. And I also just recently started watching The Wire, which is also kind of relevant to Black Lives Matter right now. It's just kind of all about, I think it's set in Baltimore, and it's kind of all about the inner workings of the police and also the black community and how they're kind of the tensions between that. And it's been super interesting so far. I've only seen a couple episodes, but people always say this is one of the best TV shows of all time. And I was like a little wary going in. I was like, I don't know if now's the right time to be watching a show about like where cops are the good guys, but it's definitely morally gray and a little murky in a way that is eye-opening, especially in a time right now. Also, I've been watching a couple other things on my Black Lives Matter list right now. So I watched Native Son, which is a movie on HBO. It is based on a book by an author named Richard Wright. It's about a black young man who gets a job working for a white family outside of Chicago, and just kind of like how he's navigating still being a part of his lower class black community, and then also kind of working for this upper class white family, being a driver for them. And then, it wasn't my favorite, and this book has also been criticized heavily by people in the black community, like James Baldwin, for example. It was an interesting movie, and it was well produced. It's starring the kid from Moonlight who plays the main character from Moonlight. He plays him in the middle section of the film, and he brought a lot to the role, which was it's a character that becomes less relatable as the movie goes on. It was an interesting movie. It wasn't my favorite that I've watched recently, but it's definitely worth a watch. And especially as someone who lived in Chicago for 10 years, it was really cool to just kind of see a film featuring a bunch of locations that I've walked by a million times. My wife was watching it, and I caught the tail end of this series on HBO called Atlanta's Missing and Murdered: The Lost Children. It's a docuseries, and it's very well made, and it's all about, there was, I think, like 30 black children that went missing in Atlanta in the 70s. And, the investigation just kind of stopped, and we still don't really know to this day what happened. And it's like 13th, like, some of these films, it's kind of hard to stomach. And that's part of the reason I was like in and out while my wife was watching it. But it's very good. And I'm probably going to have to go back and start from the beginning and watch it. But I caught the tail end, and it was very, very, very good. And then I also watched the first episode to When They See Us, which is Ava DuVernay's series on Netflix about the Central Park Five, who were a group of 5 kids who were convicted of a crime that they did not commit and then later released when they were adults because their DNA proved that they didn't commit this crime. So it's very depressing, but it is very, very good. Ava DuVernay is extremely talented. It's interesting because this series came out around the same time as her film A Wrinkle in Time came out, which was pretty critically panned, but this was critically acclaimed. So it's interesting because I know it's just obvious that she was like kind of like very focused on When They See Us as opposed to Wrinkle in Time. At least to me, it seems that way. So I'm excited to keep going on it because the acting is fantastic. Cinematography is beautiful and different. It's super cinematic and it's great so far. So let's go ahead to you, Darby. What have you been watching recently?
I haven't been watching a ton, but the main thing I've been doing is I've been rewatching all of Killing Eve because I'm going through withdrawal right now because the 3rd season just ended. So I've been rewatching that. I'm a huge fan of that. Outstanding show. Recently I've watched Fast Color, which is a movie you can find on Hulu that stars Gugu Mbatha-Raw, and it's kind of a superhero movie. It's this tiny sort of low budget thing where it's sort of post-apocalyptic. There's like no water, but she has powers, that sort of psychic powers that cause earthquakes, tremors, things like that, and its focuses on African-American family. And it's an outstanding movie. I really enjoyed it. There's a couple of different documentaries about the Tulsa race massacre, which has come up in the news recently, unfortunately. That I think that one I want to watch and 2 I think are probably worth searching out. And one of them is Black Wall Street Burning, which is a documentary. And then there's another one which is mostly on DVD, which is Before They Die. And this is a little bit older film from the early 2000s. But both of these are probably, because I've had conversations with people, friends and family who I was aware of it from college, but I didn't know a ton about it. And there's a ton of people who don't know anything about it. And another series which raised awareness on it was the Watchmen adaptation on HBO, which I think it's good for especially folks who have no experience with a lot of this stuff to kind of find out about. And I haven't been watching a lot, but I just wanted to mention real quick some stuff I've been reading. And we've been talking about James Baldwin a lot, and I've been rereading a lot of him lately. Mostly his essays, just because he's always somebody I go to in moments like this to try to understand some of what's happening and some of the perspective of African American people. And one thing I've really enjoyed that isn't really movie related, but it should be, is I've been rereading some older Milestone comics, which are from the 90s and was created by people like Darwin Cook and Dennis Cowan, which was African American superheroes and primarily African American superheroes in their own sort of universe, which only lasted a few years. And it created some lasting characters like Static, who went on to have his own animated series, and who are now more or less part of the DC universe, but don't have a big part within it. But those are great comics. They're very timely. They focus on the focus on issues we've been talking about through the lens of superheroes. And I would love to see, with all of this streaming, we've been spoiled rotten by all the different content and IP. It'd be Milestone to make a great basis for TV show, movies, whatever, all of it. So
very cool. Thank you for all those recommendations, guys. So let's go ahead and wrap up with our last little segment, which is what we're hung up So So this segment, we just are going to talk about a weird or interesting story that we just can't stop thinking about. So I'll start. Gone with the Wind was recently taken down from HBO Max. I can't remember who it was, but someone, it was a black filmmaker, I think a writer, wrote to Warner Brothers recommending that they take it down during this time and put it back up with some sort of disclaimer. And which I kind of agree with. I feel like that Gone with the Wind is a movie that it is not necessarily morally correct in a lot of what it's saying, and especially its depictions of the Confederacy and that kind of thing. And so I feel like that's okay. Like I would say they should keep it up, but put a disclaimer. But since it's been taken down from HBO Max, it has become like a bestseller on digital rentals right now, and a ton of people are watching it. But part of me just laughs because I feel like a lot of those people that are renting it don't realize that the movie is almost 4 hours long and probably didn't know what they were getting into by watching Gone with the Wind. You know, it's just an interesting topic that I think people should take a look at. I remember the Looney Tunes cartoons in the 90s used to be introed with like some sort of video from Whoopi Goldberg talking about the racist depictions, but also the value of watching these things to understand that time and also, experience the art that was created. I think there's value to watching stuff that is old, that is outdated, through the lens of understanding that it is outdated. But yeah, so why don't we go ahead to you, Alex? What are you hung up on this week?
With everything going on with Black Lives Matter and with what J.K. Rowling said recently and all the controversy surrounding her, I've been thinking just sort of about the idea of separating creators from content and sort of where our limits at. And, I don't have an answer. I'm not here to sort of, solve the thesis, but I think it's just interesting to wonder, because statues are being pulled down worldwide. And people are sort of, the defense is always, it's history. It's like, history belongs in a museum. Statues are for glorifying people. So if you don't want the statue, if you don't want the statue to get ruined, take it down and put it in a museum. There's a difference. And I suppose, does watching a film glorify its creator, or does it, especially you could say with Harry Potter, you are directly giving J.K. Rowling money when you go see a new film or go to, or purchase any of her works. But at the same time, since Harry Potter has done such a lot of good for people, and there was a lot of people on Twitter sort of making the joke of being like, how crazy is it that the Harry Potter books were all written all by themselves? It's insane. Like, that sort of just like, let's just forget about J.K. Rowling and enjoy Harry Potter for what it is, because once you've created something, it's no longer yours. That's that kind of sort of, idea that sort of artists say and people have. But when does that point become invalid? People feel weird watching Kevin Spacey movies now. I watched a movie a couple of weeks ago, and Harvey Weinstein was a producer, and I was like, oh.
But he produced so many movies.
He produced so many movies, and that's what it's hard to know. And we all want to be good people, and we all want to be socially conscious, but where do we set our limits? And I think that's an individual question. I think it's a personal question, but I think it's something we do have to be vigilant on. And where do we spend our money, and where do we spend our time, and who do we support?
There is, real quick, I think this is a fascinating topic, Alex. If sometime when we have time, it'd be worthwhile getting into this intersection of ownership and fandom, versus the dislocation of the author. Because we live in this moment where all of us feel proprietary about something. Star Wars, Marvel, Harry Potter. And then, like you said, are we glorifying the author? Aren't we kind of tearing down their statues anyway when people, what was the documentary, People versus George Lucas, whatever it was. We've been kind of doing this anyway, rhetorically. So someday we'll have to have like an entire episode devoted to this. But
I like that idea.
But it's a fascinating topic. Absolutely.
Very cool. And Darby, what are you hung up on this week?
Yeah, so real quick, this statement that's going around from Warner Brothers that they don't know if a standalone Superman movie is viable right now. I'm hung up on it because Superman is Superman, but I think it's also, this type of thinking is testament to the moment that we're living in. You don't get any more literally truth, justice in the American way than Superman, and the idea that they can't conceive of how to make a movie about him that works, I think says everything about this sort of moral apathy that hopefully we're getting out of. Because we've been lucky with the MCU to have Captain America the last 10 years or so. And this is a character that was once written off like Superman was, as being out of date, out of touch, old-fashioned. And that just wasn't true. And that they proved that. And a character like Superman, who's an immigrant, who is a lot of things, who comes from, whose parents, adoptive parents almost certainly were Christian conservatives, raised him with values that were fantastic and were human. And he went out and did a lot of great things in the world. They should be able to make a movie about him that reflects those values. So I'm stuck on that.
I think there's a universal misinterpretation as well of Superman's character, in that he's always written as being like I wrote quite a few Superman comic books, and it's always that there's that divide between people who go, let's make Superman so strong, let's make his enemy bigger and harder to defeat, and that'll make a good story. And then the other half that I would say is more compelling, especially if you want to make a film for now, is the part that go, we don't have to make the enemy stronger, we have to make Superman more like questioning of his morals, or more restrained. Like, there's a reason that he has the, and you, like you said, it's so relevant, he has the ability to be as brutal to anyone as he wants, and it is only his morals and his choice that keep him restrained. And I think that's that's a more compelling story than how big of a monster can we have Superman punch.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I also think Henry Cavill is a perfect Superman, and I want to see more of him before he gets too old. So let's hope that happens. Come on, Warner Brothers. That'll do it for this episode of the Movie News Network. If you like the show and want to help us out, make sure you subscribe to this podcast, leave a review, and share it with your friends. So, Darby, where can people keep up with you on the web?
You can find me at my website, which is darbyharn.com, and you can find me on Twitter at darbyharn.
Very cool. And Alex, how can people follow you to keep up with your work?
They can find me on Twitter at new_Macca. That's MACCA.
Very cool. And again, I'm David Wall. In addition to writing for the site, I'm a video editor and stop motion animator. You can follow my work on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd at Davis_Wally. If you liked this podcast, try out the Resistance broadcast. It's a show by our sister site, Star Wars Newsnet, and that goes deep into discussion about a galaxy far, far away. And as always, for more up-to-date news stories, be sure to regularly check out movienewsnet.com.